How much, this is a question that I've been wrestling with as I watch this story unfold is how much of this situation, this story is idiosyncratic versus systemic? And you've touched on this a little bit earlier in our conversation, but let's really build that out a little bit. I will tell you that I think it's a mix of both. If I had to weight it in my mind, I'm going to say it's mostly idiosyncratic. I don't think we're going to see a large wave of Chapter 7 filings across the industry. You mentioned there might be a cooling off of, you know, warehouse lending, at least in volume, or maybe more scrutiny um, around those lending arrangements, particularly around the operational aspects. What are your thoughts there, idiosyncratic or systemic?
Well, I agree with you to the extent that it's majority idiosyncratic, majority being over 50% idiosyncratic. I think vertically integrated plus the heavy emphasis and marketing of undocumented and the concentration in Texas, single owner, private, although they were actually majority owned by, I think, BlackRock and others. So should have been a positive. But I've seen a number of elements that overlap other smaller subprime lenders that are cause for concern, like somebody like a LendBuzz I've been looking into, and they don't, even worst case, they don't appear to have anywhere close to the undocumented, although they don't specify it. They do have some exposure. Their FICO scores are much higher. They don't have their own dealer network. So I look at all that. I'm like, LendBuzz is kind of in the same, has some risks, but they have their own independent risks that cause me concern. Their relationship with their dealer network. They were relying on, I think, some amount of dealer guarantees to reduce their losses historically. That dealer guarantee is now diminished. So you can look at each subprime lender and say, they share maybe 20% with Tricolor. Nobody is more than 50%, but they have their own risks. And the industry itself, just the fact that I say 60%, maybe 70 is idiosyncratic to Tricolor, doesn't mean there's not a whole host of other issues facing the subprime auto lending in general. But in general, I agree with you. I think there's a number of unique factors to Tricolor that makes it likely we're not going to see wholesale collapsing into Chapter 7s. But the tightening of the warehouse lines themselves, remember, these things collapse when somebody discovers it. First Brands, which happened at the same time, collapsed into Chapter 7. Their bonds were trading at par.
It
Chapter
was it.
11.
Sorry, that was Chapter 11, right?
Chapter 11. So
Yeah.
they were trading at par. Bonds are now trading at 30, senior bonds. How did they get found out? Well, they were doing a refinance, and one of the lenders says, we want to do a quality of earnings report.
Hmm.
Well, they failed that quality of earnings report. And then I think a month or two later, they collapsed into bankruptcy. So tightening of due diligence on warehouse lending itself can reveal that the double pledging, triple pledging that happened at Tricolor and similar looks like it was happening at First Brands may be happening in other warehouse lines. Once they discover that, what do? They have to shut down that warehouse line. They have to terminate that line, which hits the credit of that lender, which could shut down that auto lender. So there's a cascading effect, even if it's not similar to Tricolor. The mere tightening and increase of due diligence on auto warehouse lines could cause a reduction or contraction in credit that could cause some of those smaller players to have a lot more trouble. And we saw CarMax, which is vertically integrated, which shares that with Tricolor. Their stock price dropped 20% in one day, largely on the back of a significant increase in auto loan losses.
Mhm.
So, you can find each of these auto ABS players have some risks that overlap with Tricolor, whether it's vertically integrated, whether it's the weaker subprime, undocumented, but nobody shares enough of the elements of Tricolor to say, oh, that they're exactly like that.